a remarkable scientific discovery has been made in China. Researchers say they found the skull of what they believe is a new species of human, which could be our closest evolutionary relative.
The skull you're about to see may not belong to a distant ancestor. It may belong to our closest relative, closer than the Neanderthals, and it spent 85 years at the bottom of a well. During the Japanese occupation of China, a laborer in the city of Harbin found a massive skull at a construction site. He knew it was important, so he hid it at the bottom of an abandoned well. It stayed there for decades, through the war, the revolution, everything, until the man was on his deathbed and whispered the secret to his family. They recovered it in 2018. When scientists finally examined it, the skull didn't match anything in the fossil record. You were told Homo sapiens first appeared around 300,000 years ago. Clean timeline, African origin. Simple. That timeline just collapsed. A team from the Chinese Academy of Sciences, Fudan University, and London's Natural History Museum published evidence in Science showing that a crushed million-year-old skull from central China carries the anatomical signature of our lineage, not Homo erectus, something far closer to us than it had any right to be at that age. Chris Stringer, one of the most cited paleoanthropologists alive, co-authored the study. His reaction was blunt. This changes a lot of thinking. Then, months later, a second team redated those same fossils, pushed the age to 1.77 million years. And the first study, its 10,000 simulations, its CT reconstruction, its 100-specimen comparison, was quietly walked back, as if it never happened. What you're about to hear is the full chain of evidence. A wartime skull at the bottom of a well. A phantom species built from a single finger bone. And the academic firefight that erupted when one fossil threatened to collapse a century of theory. One of the co-authors on the second paper was the lead author of the first, the same scientist, contradicting his own published findings. In print, nobody has explained why. That skull has a name now, and a species. But to understand why it terrified the academic establishment, you have to go back to a freezing cave in Siberia and a ghost that haunted science for 15 years. Siberia, the Altai Mountains, a limestone cave so cold that breath crystallizes before it leaves your mouth. In 2010, buried in frozen sediment, archaeologists recovered a bone fragment, a piece of a child's pinky finger, smaller than a matchstick. It was everything. Geneticists at the Max Planck Institute cracked it open and extracted DNA. The sequence didn't match Neanderthal, didn't match Homo sapiens. It was a completely unknown branch of the human family, hiding inside a child's broken finger. They named it after the cave, the Denisovans, an entire human species, identified not from a skeleton, not from a skull, not from a single tool, but from a molecule. Scientists could read their complete genetic code, but they couldn't draw a face. For 15 years, the Denisovans existed as a ghost in a genome, a name with no body. Then came the skull from the well. That cranium from Harbin, the one from the well, was massive. Thick brow ridge, brain cavity rivaling the average Neanderthal. A bizarre mosaic, the long, low brain case of something ancient, fused with a flat, almost modern-looking face. Researchers classified it as a new species, Homo longi, dragon man. But several scientists had a suspicion. That face, that bone structure. Could dragon man be the phantom they'd been chasing? Proving it nearly failed. Bone samples, empty. Tooth samples, contaminated. Until geneticist Chao Mei Fu tried something no one else had thought of. She scraped fossilized dental plaque, ancient tartar cemented to dragon man's last surviving tooth, and found genetic material trapped inside the calcified gunk, like insects in amber. Mitochondrial DNA, 27 gene variants matching known Denisovan sequences, protein signatures confirming it independently. 15 years of searching, and the answer was hiding in tooth gunk. The phantom had a face. And it wasn't what anyone expected. Paleoanthropologists estimated the individual at roughly 220 pounds, dense, heavy-boned, built for cold and violence. This wasn't some fragile branch on a dying tree. This was an apex predator that shared the planet with our ancestors, and it raised an immediate question. If something that powerful existed across Asia, where was the rest of the evidence? Picture this: 3,280 meters above sea level on the Tibetan Plateau. The wind cuts through every layer you're wearing. Every breath feels like sucking air through a wet cloth. Modern archaeologists who work here report splitting headaches within hours. The Denisovans lived here, not for days, for over 100,000 years. Inside Baishia Karst Cave, a jawbone fragment confirmed Denisovan through protein analysis dates back at least 160,000 years. But when teams returned and sifted through over 2,500 bone fragments from the cave floor, the picture was staggering. Blue sheep, wild yaks, woolly rhinos, spotted hyenas, every bone telling the same story: clean, deliberate cut marks. These animals were hunted, butchered, stripped of their skins, their marrow cracked open. The Denisovans didn't stumble onto the Tibetan Plateau and survive. They dominated it. And here's the find that changed the equation. Buried among those thousands of animal bones, scientists identified a single human rib. Proteomic analysis confirmed it: Denisovan, dated between 48,000 and 32,000 years ago. That date matters. 48,000 years ago is the exact window when modern humans were spreading across Eurasia. Our ancestors were arriving, and the Denisovans were still there, still hunting at altitude, still thriving where we couldn't breathe. At 3,280 meters, the air pressure is so low that each breath delivers roughly a third less oxygen than at sea level. You get sick, some people die, but millions of Tibetans live there today because they carry a specific variant of the EPAS1 gene that regulates oxygen response. That variant isn't ours. It's Denisovan, transferred through ancient interbreeding. Without it, human settlement of the Tibetan Plateau may never have happened. We didn't just coexist with the Denisovans. We needed them. And their range wasn't limited to frozen mountains. Denisovan DNA has been detected in populations across Sumatra, Borneo, and Melanesia, tropical environments thousands of kilometers south, ice to jungle. This wasn't a tribe. This was an empire. So what happened to them? How does a species that resilient, that widespread, vanish? Hold that question, because the skull you're about to see doesn't just change when the Denisovans appeared. It changes when we appeared. And when one research team published the answer, their own colleague turned around and tried to bury it. Year 1989, Hubei Province, central China. Archaeologists pulled two skulls from a riverbank along the Han River. One that year, a second the year after. Both badly crushed, flattened by geological pressure into something barely recognizable. Nobody can agree on what they're seeing. The default? Homo erectus. Ancient. Expected. Unremarkable. For 35 years, those skulls sat in a museum. Filed. Forgotten. Then, researcher Xiaobo Feng asked a question nobody had bothered asking. What if the crushing distorted the skull so badly that we misidentified it entirely? His team fed the fossil into a CT scanner. Layer by layer, they digitally peeled away the damage, separating bone from rock, reversing the distortions that had flattened the skull beyond recognition. 10,000 randomized error simulations to make sure it wasn't wishful thinking. Then, they 3D printed the corrected skull, held it in their hands, and compared it to over 100 other specimens. It wasn't Homo erectus. The brain case was too large, the cheekbones too flat, the orbital spacing too narrow. Feature after feature pointed toward Homo longi, Dragon Man, the Denisovan lineage. The study, published in Science, placed Yunxian too squarely within the longi clade, an early ancestor of the Denisovans. And that's where the math gets dangerous. Yunxian 2 is roughly 1 million years old. If it belongs to the Denisovan lineage, then our family split from theirs before that date, not at 600,000 years ago, which is what the genetics textbooks say, over 1 million. maybe 1.2 million. Put it this way. We've been told our species starts at 300,000 years. This skull says our lineage, the branch that eventually became us, was already its own thing 400,000 years before that. The textbooks aren't slightly wrong. They're missing almost half the story. The team went further. The oldest known fossil in the Longi Denisovan clade now sits in central China, not in Africa. That raised a question nobody was prepared for. Did our common ancestor originate in Asia, not on the African savanna? The backlash was immediate, and it was fierce. Pay close attention to what happens next, because this is where the science stops behaving like science. Early 2026, a new paper drops in Science Advances. A separate team redates the Yunxian site using aluminum beryllium burial dating, a technique that tracks cosmic ray isotopes trapped in quartz. Their result? The skulls aren't 1 million years old. They're 1.77 million years old, nearly twice as ancient. Logically, you'd think that makes the findings more explosive. A Denisovan ancestor at 1.77 million years? That's a headline that rewrites every textbook on every shelf. That's not what happened. The new paper reclassified the skulls as Homo erectus. No discussion of the CT data. No acknowledgement of the features that didn't match erectus. No mention of the Longi clade. The abstract reads as if the previous study simply never existed. And here's the detail that should stop you cold. One of the co-authors on this redating paper, Xiaobo Feng, the lead author of the original morphological study. The man who proved these skulls didn't look like erectus, now co-signing a paper that calls them erectus, without a single line of explanation. Chris Stringer isn't buying it. He publicly noted the Yunxian skulls remain quite different from small-brained erectus fossils. The bones haven't changed. The morphology hasn't changed. What changed is the number, and when it got too old for the model, the interpretation flipped overnight. John Hawks at the University of Wisconsin put it plainly. 1.77 million years is too old to credibly connect to the Denisovan group. So the establishment contracted the model rather than expanded it, folded the evidence into a box it had already been shown not to fit. There is a third Yunxian skull, found in 2022, reportedly in excellent condition, not yet formally analyzed. It could end this debate permanently, but until it does, we're staring at two possibilities that cannot both be true. Either the bones are right, and the Denisovan bloodline runs over 1 million years deep, or the calendar is right, and the establishment was justified in shelving the most detailed study of these fossils ever conducted. The bones or the calendar? Which do you trust? Type suppression if you believe the morphological data is being sidelined to protect the established timeline. Type correction if you think the redating legitimately puts these skulls back with Homo erectus. Subscribe to Hidden Latitude. That third skull is sitting in a lab in China right now. When the results drop, we'll be here first.